Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody, the podcast where we talk with people behind top events to showcase how they positively transform the communities they serve. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm really excited to have a special guest on. So we have Allie Flanders Dotson, and she is the Chief Advancement Officer of an organization called Kids Meals. And while we talk a lot about galas and fundraising events, one strategy for events is utilizing them as part of a capital campaign strategy, because anyone who's ever had to raise money, whether it's for a public project like a capital campaign or raising money for starting a business, your donors and the investors are going to be and have different ways of wanting to be entertained, of wanting to engage with you and wanting to engage with the organization. And events is one way to get certain donors to invest in your mission and what you are wanting to do to positively transform the community you serve. So Allie will have a great set of insights. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation. It's one that's long overdue on this program. So I'm really excited to have it. So Allie, welcome. And we are so excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Rob. I'm happy to be here. This is fun.
Absolutely. So tell us what the mission of Kids Meals is.
Absolutely. Kids Meals has actually been around in Houston for 19 years. It's a nonprofit that serves preschool age children, so those 0 to 5-year-olds, by feeding them healthy, free meals delivered directly to their doorstep every weekday. So if you can imagine, these are the kids who don't go to kindergarten yet. They're littler, so they're not accessing those reduced or free meals that they might be getting at school. Instead, they're left at home and oftentimes don't have access to food or don't know where their next meal is coming from. So that is the core mission of Kids Meals, is to really get those free lunches into the hands of those 0 to 5-year-olds every day. And we do that by delivering it straight to their door.
That's fantastic. And I'm glad you brought the part about healthy because, food habits start at a really young age. So it's great that you are helping set that trajectory by the programs and the things that Kids Meals do. So, I always love asking this question because everyone gets involved in organizations in different ways. But talk about how you initially got involved with this organization and why you are so passionate about it personally.
Definitely. My experience with Kids Meals started actually as a volunteer with my own children. So, as part of my church, they made sandwiches and packed lunches for Kids Meals that they would then get to the organization to go out to the kids in the week ahead. And so, as my children were tiny and growing, it was such a great way to do something as a family, do something with them, teach them about service. And so, it's also really fun the way that Kids Meals packs the lunches because you can watch younger kids put stickers on the bags or color them with crayons, right? They're 4 years old and they can't do as many things as their older siblings. And then you watch them grow into the kids who are running the sandwich line or organizing the way the lunches are packed, right? So for me, it was just an incredible opportunity to serve with my children, have fun on a Sunday after church, and serve the kids in our community. And so I've always had a special place in my heart for Kids Meals. Along the way, I was in the nonprofit world here in Houston since the late 90s, have been involved in nonprofit work and volunteering. And so fast forward, decades later, I see the Chief Advancement Officer position for Kids Meals open up. People knew I love this organization. So multiple people texted me, Allie, did you see they need a new CAO, right? So I applied and that volunteer work turned into a full-time job.
That's fantastic. And for anyone who's not familiar with the term, explain exactly what a chief advancement officer does and how it's vital for an organization to be successful.
Yes, definitely. So here at Kids Meals, the way that we structure the advancement office, if you will, is that it's the communications and the marketing on one side and then the fundraising on the other. And really believing that those two things have to go hand in hand. The way that we tell our story, the way that we communicate, the messaging that we use, all of those things tie directly into fundraising. So having one person sort of oversee both of those silos, if you will, make sure that they're communicating, they're well connected, and that they're rowing in tandem, I guess.
That's fantastic. And I love how you mentioned that they're kind of different silos, but they are extremely different, extremely interconnected. That's a
Yes.
mouthful. That's a mouthful to say at any time of the day. So I really am I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I'd love to know from your perspective, talk a little bit about how what the goals and the impact Kids Meals is looking to achieve with your latest capital campaign, Building Hope, and how all those things from a chief advancement officer perspective are really, vital and important.
Definitely. So in Houston, food insecurity is a really big problem. We know that. And over the past few years, it's grown substantially. So now what's estimated is about 1 in 4 kids, or over 1,000, excuse me, over 100,000 preschoolers in Harris County are estimated to be food insecure, meaning they're not sure where their next meal is coming from, or they don't know if they're going to have access to the right nutritious food. So that's a pretty daunting number, right? 100,000 children. And when the leadership of Kids Meals was thinking, in the very early stages of this campaign about a capital campaign and potentially moving into a new building, they were in a lease. They knew that was going to expire. So there was a little bit of urgency there, right? It was important to think about that. And a bricks and mortar facility that they built, that they would own, they knew would be a way to move them, into the future. So the ability to feed more kids. Right now, Kids Meals is feeding about 10,000 preschoolers every day, but with 100,000 preschoolers hungry, right? We know that we need to have a building and a plan that's going to allow us to scale up at the right rate and speed, so that we can be successful in truly ending childhood hunger, right? That's the goal, Rob, is to feed all 100,000 of those kids.
Gosh, and it's, 10,000 is a big number, but as you said, you have a lot of room that you can scale and grow. And a capital
Correct.
campaign really is one of the best ways that an organization can do that. Talk a
Mhm.
little bit about for this particular Building Hope initiative, what the organization's decision-making process was that a capital campaign was going to be the best route to fund this initiative over grants or a gala or any of the other large sorts of, fundraising opportunities out there.
Yes, I think Kids Meals always probably knew, especially with the lease expiring, that a building was needed, but COVID played a pretty big role in the growth of the organization. The need for meals during the period of COVID really skyrocketed. There were so many families that needed food that had never thought that they would be in need of nutrition or healthy meals or the ability to access nutrition, right? So, with the needs skyrocketing, it really pressed upon the leadership the urgency of a new building. And so, the decision didn't happen overnight, but they knew that with this sort of amplified urgency, and the demand for meals, they couldn't continue to grow at a rate that they needed to in their existing building. And so it wasn't really that they wanted a new building. It was really essential, right, for the survival and growth of the organization. They had to have a new space. And so a capital campaign felt like the right way to do that. To those involved in the early stages of the campaign, they thought it would really give them the framework to inspire people around this sort of once in a lifetime opportunity to set this Houston community up for success, to be able to reach the needs of these children, the future of Houston, if you will, make sure that they have the food they need, so they can grow and thrive. And a capital campaign also gave them the flexibility to adapt. As they moved through a sort of uncertain plan in the beginning, right? COVID was a really uncertain time. So to launch a campaign when a lot of things feel uncertain, capital campaigns provide you with a little bit of flexibility to be nimble, to pivot, and to really think through your strategy in different phases.
So before we go to the phases, talk about how, because I don't think this gets talked about enough. Talk about how capital campaigns do allow for flexibility because you are raising money over a sustained period of time. It's not cut
Mhm.
a check and it's done in 7 days. It can take, in most cases, it takes a period of months, if not years. So talk a little
Yeah.
bit about what you mean by adaptability.
I think that the Kids Meals leadership really felt like inspiring people to think of this future that we were dreaming of, but then compartmentalize it a little bit, if you will, into phases. made it seem more doable, made it seem less daunting to really talk about maybe the first thing that had to happen, and see a way to get there and then celebrate and move on to the next piece. So I do think capital campaigns, when you structure them in that way, make the end game seem less scary, because you really have a plan in place to get from one piece to the next.
Yes, I totally get that. It's almost like climbing, instead of climbing Mount Everest, you're
Uh-huh,
climbing and you're going on a plateau for a little while, and then you climb up the next thing, and then you go on a
for
plateau for a
sure.
while. So it makes it a little bit more realistic. And I love that, there's a lot of questions there, but I want to kind of go back to the phases. And I know that you all have three phases. So your phases were land, building, and sustainability. So talk
Correct.
about those three phases, how you all came up with them, and how that allows you, like you had talked about, to celebrate those milestones when you go from one phase to the next.
Definitely. So the first phase of the campaign being that land phase, like you mentioned, the kids' meals team knew obviously that to build a building, we had to have a piece of land, right? But where should that land be? And what is the best location? And, there are a lot of questions that come with purchasing a piece of property, especially in Houston. So we had some incredible leadership at the time, that helped create a hotspot analysis of where the kids' meals volunteers come from, where they might live and work. One of the things that we haven't touched on yet is that Kids Meals relies a lot on volunteers. We have about probably 40,000 volunteers last year that either were in the building or helping off-site to make the meals, create the sandwiches, pack the lunches, donate in-kind items, right? Like we could not do this work without volunteers. If you can imagine how many staff members it would take to make 10,000 sandwiches every day, right? So volunteers are critical. So when buying a new piece of property and thinking about a campaign and a new building, where your volunteers are coming from is a really big part of what we needed to think about. So this hotspot analysis really looked at where the volunteers are living and working, where they're coming from, and how we might purchase a piece of property that's the best for the future of the organization. And so that was really the first critical phase for us, is identifying the where of the land and then finding a piece of land and being able to purchase it. And so that was phase one, the land.
That's fantastic. And what I appreciate about that answer is a lot of times people think, oh, I've got to put it directly in the community that needs it to be the most impacted. But you have to step back and you have to look at things holistically. And if your organization needs a lot of volunteers to make it happen, you need them to be accessible, because if most of the volunteers are 20 or 30 minutes away, you that may not necessarily be effective, may negatively impact the number of volunteers. And thankfully, with something like
Exactly.
sandwiches, everyone packs them in the morning and they wait 3 or 4 hours before they're eaten. So it's not like you need to have it immediately. That's the type of thing that, people are accustomed to, packing a lunch at home and then taking it to school and having it sit
Taking
in
it with them.
in your backpack, because I don't even think they have lockers anymore for 4 or 5 hours. So everyone's
Right. The
used to
other thing,
that.
Rob, that's interesting is that we serve kids across 56 zip codes. So we really are sending out drivers in vans that are Kids Meals branded. We have our drivers are called Hope Providers, and they're all full-time employees. So they're driving the same route every day. They're touching the same families. They're developing those relationships. But those drivers are really going out, if you will, like a star from the Kids Meals location, because all the routes go in different directions. So for us, there was some flexibility in our location from a service perspective, just because we are truly driving all over the greater Houston area.
And I'm glad you brought that piece up, because the need is universal, and it's not necessarily, there may be a majority in one zip code, but a lot of different zip codes are affected. And that's kind of why you have to look at everything like it's an interconnected network. And that's basically when you're providing 10,000 free lunches to children 0 to 5 every day. That's a complex network. That is not a, simple, we're just going to drop here and it's all done. So I'm glad you brought that up. And, after land, the next phase is building. So talk about the second phase with building and kind of the process of what you all are going through with that.
Definitely. The building phase, I think, is one where it touches on the flexibility that you and I spoke about before, because costs rise, things change. And so, as you identify an architect and a builder and really gather your team, there's a lot of flexibility needed and just being nimble and changing, and also just a lot of transparency. right? Like we're realizing now that what we think that we need to build on this piece of land is maybe bigger than we thought or different than we thought. And so how can we be super transparent with the donors that we're talking to and telling our story to, and how can we make sure that we're flexible enough, but staying true to the original, vision or the dream of what this building will be for kids' meals. And so that building phase for kids' meals really involves, like I said, bringing the team together. Kids' meals involved a lot of experts early on, just industry experts, you know, people that were experts in restaurant service or, a really great builder, different things so that this could really be a purpose-built facility. One of the things about our previous space is that we were so fortunate to be able to expand piece by piece over the years and so grateful for that space, but it wasn't necessarily created in a way that made it efficient or effective for the kids' meals program. So this new building provided this opportunity to really make sure it was purpose-built. It was efficient. It was going to make every dollar go farther. It was going to allow us to do things we couldn't do before. And with that came changing our minds or moving in a different direction. And so lots of hard work and dedication and flexibility on the part of the Kids Meals team to really get the building ready to go with the architects and the builders and then break ground.
So I have a follow-up question to that, and I'm glad you brought up the flexibility piece. And I'm sure that there are probably some people listening to, all right, how am I flexible, but how do I make sure the costs don't spiral out of control, with that flexibility? And, how do you kind of create the boundaries, let's just say, for lack of a better term, to make sure that you're not tweaking the little tiniest thing that, will drive your architect or drive your contractor up the wall, pun intended. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
So that I think is great leadership in a lot of ways. Really staying true to the vision and the mission and understanding what Kids Meals needs in this building, but also not being too extravagant or too unrealistic about things that just aren't within the budget. So towing that line between this will really get us to 100,000 children, hopefully one day, or as many as we can, but not spending so much money that it's an unrealistic goal. So I think the team was, this was before my time, obviously, because this was back in the very early parts of the campaign before I was even on the Kids Meals team. But when the leadership talks about that period of time and the way that they were sort of nimble and planning, it was all about teamwork and a lot of communication and asking a lot of questions and making sure that we were making the dollars go farther in the right places, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And really, it's, understanding what your needs are and what's an extravagance versus what's actually truly going to move the needle, and just making the discernment between those two is really key. And I'm glad you brought that up. And that leads us to the third phase, which is the sustainability phase. So explain what sustainability means to you, because sustainability is one of those things that can mean different things depending on the context. So explain what that is and how that phase is currently going.
The sustainability phase for kids' meals means this building is going to live long after those of us that are here right now in the building. So, being really forward thinking about the future of the organization and also the community that we're serving, and how can we make sure that this building is well cared for, is fixed when in need of repair, and is kept up to, the highest, the best technology or, the things that we need, the newest equipment, things like that to serve us long after we're gone. So when the team thinks about sustainability, it's really about making sure that there are funds in place to care for the building and do all these things I just mentioned so that we're never taking dollars away from feeding children. Because, over here on the other side is the operating budget and the dollars we're raising to get those meals into the hands of those preschoolers every single day. And we don't ever want to take dollars away from that part of it.
That's fantastic, and I'm really glad you brought that piece up. So really the sustainability thing for you all is as much about financial success in insofar that you want to make sure that you have everything that you need so that those
Mhm.
services will always go to the children. You never have to be in a position to cut them. And I want to talk about something that you had brought up earlier, and that was the incredible leadership that you all had at the beginning of this, and, the importance of having a strong board. So,
Mhm.
what advice would you give to someone who's maybe looking to launch a capital campaign? What type of board will ultimately be effective in helping raise the funds? Because you can't do that without a strong board. I would never advise anyone to do a capital campaign without one. So,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about that?
I agree for sure, Rob. A board is essential, a strong board. Ours was really not just financially committed to the project and committed to sort of this future dream for kids' meals, but also just so willing to open doors and make connections. And so I really see a strong board being those members who are asking someone to lunch or making an introduction to their company's foundation or, going so much further than writing a check. Beyond that, our board, they were incredible partners in that they would roll up their sleeves and help troubleshoot, help us, look at budgets or look at decision making in the new building. And really, like I said, rolling up their sleeves, getting in there with us, helping us with strategy, helping us with execution. They really, a strong board that owns the vision, I think is really what helps make a campaign. It's really the difference between that sort of stalled campaign and that successful campaign is that board that is right there, owning the vision with you all the way, until the end, until success, right?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the part that cutting a check is just, that's not enough. There has to be, it was almost, when you said that, I was like, oh, it's almost like advancement. You're encouraging, you got to have communication to go
Mhm.
on top of the fundraising that's going on. And, you can see how, in your role, you see that those things intersect all the time. And, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. No worries. So, you know, everything you've described so far, you all have a really good, strong, solid plan. Things have flowed pretty smoothly. But talk a little bit about some of the challenges that come into running a capital campaign, because it's a big, lengthy, long, expensive
Mhm.
journey.
Absolutely. I think lengthy journey is so accurate. And when I think about at least one of the biggest challenges, I think, is just balancing that now versus the future. Just because it is, like you said, a lengthy journey. So in the case of kids' meals, we're delivering thousands of meals to children every day. That work can't stop, right? Hungry kids don't wait. So there's the now of just continuing that mission. You're serving those children, but then at the same time, you're asking donors to invest in a facility that isn't going to come to fruition for years, right? So it's really everyone in the campaign, from the volunteers to the board members to, we had an honorary cabinet, all of those individuals have to be really good storytellers. They have to be really good communicators. This ability to show the impact of what we're doing right now and then paint this picture for the future that, along the way, the bumps of construction delays or rising costs or competing priorities, maybe within the community, like being able to be flexible and honest and creative as we all move through that together to say, this is now, but here's the future.
That's really well said, because a lot of people can just kind of get stuck in the moment, not, forgetting you gotta see the forest through the trees, for a lack of a better phrase. And, talk about, because you had the three phases earlier, and I want to talk about, how do you, when things are ambitious and trying to get people to see all the way to the end, how do you set those clear milestones and balance the realistic expectations that come from such an ambitious initiative?
Yes, I think milestones celebrating, if that's what we're calling it, stopping to really celebrate something that occurs. I think it's super important. For kids' meals, there were a number of milestones that they really paused and celebrated, which I think helped with that momentum and that passion and excitement with everyone involved. Buying the land was a big one, obviously, right? Like just executing that purchase of the property and pausing to be thrilled that we'd raised enough money to be able to do that. That's a huge milestone, very worthy of celebration. And then breaking ground is a big one. You know, there's a reason why we see photos with the shovels in the dirt. A lot of times it's because it's a big deal. It's this moment where you've secured your partners, you have your architect and your plans, and you've got this property, and you know, you are starting. It's that first visible moment of what is to come, right? That's really where the visual journey starts because you see it happen from that moment that that shovel goes in the dirt. Everything that happens, we can see. So, you know, that's a big deal. Raising the first $10 million was sort of an internal milestone that Kids Meals celebrated. It's important that behind the scenes, even if everyone doesn't know that that's what's happening or they can't see it from the outside, that's important just for morale and realizing that we can do something big and that we're in this together and the team is on its way. So that first 10 million was a big milestone for Kids Meals. And then our biggest milestone maybe yet is to come, Rob. We have our grand opening the last week of September. So that sort of public moment where you open your doors is, you know, the culmination of an incredible campaign and also just the start of a new story.
Well, first of all, congratulations on that milestone. Secondly, we've talked a lot about, the folks internally at Kids Meals and the board members, but doing anything like this, it takes more than a village. It takes a city, literally, and you're in a city.
Right.
So we'll go with that. Talk a little bit about some of the other people who are a part of your village that, are not board members or are not Kids Meals employees that have gotten involved with the capital campaign and how how they've done so. Maybe just an example or two.
Yes, Kids Meals definitely brought in so many different individuals and parts of the community in this campaign. So, partnering with corporate leaders and elected officials, also faith communities, local influencers, our volunteers that come in every day. There were so many different pieces of the campaign where we brought in new partners. Another interesting piece of the Kids Meals Capital campaign is that we had the new market tax credits, which require outside partners who are almost advisors to help us navigate the complexity of that. And so these relationships are really vital in helping Kids Meals with expertise we didn't have in-house, and reminding us that these, big goals with these big numbers require many hands. So Kids Meals did do a great job of involving, a number of different people across the community to help us with this campaign.
No, it's fantastic. And, I'm glad to see, so many different swaths of the community have come into play. And, I want to talk about events in terms of a capital campaign because there's all different types of in-person events. There's everything from a private major gift dinner to a gala and everything in between. So what
Yeah.
are some of the ways Kids Meals uses in-person events to not just recruit donors, but also build awareness? Because like you said, the media crews come out for the first shovel because for a reason.
Right.
Talk about those types of events as a part of the Building Hope Initiative fundraising effort.
Mhm. I would say from the very beginning, the Kids Meals team was very intentional about using kind of the behind the scenes concept, if you will, with events. So things like hard hat tours, even of the building before much had started, or just to show off the property. And then, of course, once the building started being built, there was an opportunity through the entire building process to do that. So small gatherings at the construction site with key people. And also just using volunteer days in our previous facility to show the impact, to tell the story, and to begin to help people see what that future vision looks like. So most of the Building Hope campaign events were very small, very intimate. Um, hopefully people thought they were authentic. We were trying to allow donors to see and hear about the current impact, but then really touch and feel it as they heard about the story of what's to come. And so using them also as relationship building, oftentimes we were thoughtful about the people that were hosting the tour with someone new who didn't know our story, to introduce existing donors to new prospects in a really natural way, that allowed everyone to be really excited and invested.
Very well said. And, I have a follow-up question to that, and it kind of ties into events again. So, how are the event goals of a capital campaign event similar or different to, say, the goal of like a gala or a fundraiser or hosting a 5K or one of those sorts of things?
Definitely different for kids' meals in the way that we did our campaign events. So our biggest fundraising event is a luncheon every year in the fall. This year it's in November, and it's called the Harvest Luncheon. And it's a very it's a single event, right? A single luncheon. Its goal is to entertain and celebrate some of the big milestones from the year before and think about the future and what's ahead. But it's much more. Of a one-time thing with a specific fundraising goal. The campaign events, on the other hand, were really more about building belief in what was to come and what could be achieved if we all did it together, right? It's like more focused on storytelling and transparency about how we might have shifted or changed. And the energy, I feel like when you leave an intimate campaign event for us, we were hoping the energy was different. People were leaving, not just with oh, it's amazing, they're doing great things. I believe in this mission, which we hope to always be true, but also really leaving a campaign event feeling like they're part of something that's going to be transformational, right? They see the future the way we see the future, and they want to be part of that transformation.
Very well said. And we're talking about these different sorts of events, and another one I want to kind of dive into are kind of donors who may be a little bit more discreet, that they don't necessarily want to be seen with a hard hat, or they don't want to be seen at a gala or something in a public forum, and they kind of want to give privately, and it's maybe more about an intimate event like a lunch or a dinner. So share with us how you all go about determining, okay, who am I going to invite to what? Because and I think people think, oh, I've got to invite a major donor to every single thing. And a lot of times I'll get major donors coming to me saying, I don't want to be invited to every single thing. I want them to invite the things that they know are relevant to me. So share with us how you all as an organization determine what to invite potential major donors to from an event perspective, anything from a hard hat
Mhm.
tour to the luncheon to a private dinner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in a capital campaign or in just fundraising in general, in the end comes down to just knowing your donors, trying to get to know them, ask enough questions that um, you might have a gauge on, is this someone who's energized by a crowd and that wants that sense of momentum and would love this big event, or is it someone who you think might want to ask a lot of questions and really dig deep into a certain piece of it or get more into the details? And that could mean that an intimate setting would be more appropriate to answer all those questions and really meet the needs of that donor. So we try to be thoughtful and tailor each invitation to the donor's personality and also the stage and the relationship, right? Like if we'd never met them before versus if we knew them really well. I think that also makes a big difference in what you know about them and where you go with what event you invite them to. And again, I mean, as we've said this whole podcast, flexibility is key, right? Like we were adjusting constantly based maybe on what donors needed or what they asked for. And sometimes donors surprise you and they want to do something different. And so you've got to be flexible.
Being flexible, but the most important and critical thing is you have to know your audience and you have to know your donors individually within your audience, because different people are going to want different things. That's just in a city of 8 million people like Houston is, that's part of
Correct.
the game. I wish
It
they all
definitely.
operate and behave the same way. It would make your jobs a lot easier, but but they do not. So I know we're coming up on time here, and I want to end with this question, and I know you'll be able to give us, some great advice here, and that is, what advice would you give to someone looking to plan and launch their first capital campaign?
Um, that's a great question, Rob. I think for a couple things, I think first is remembering that it's important to bring everyone along for the ride, right? Like you and I talked about how the leadership in this campaign tried to be very thoughtful about um, volunteers, board members, community leaders, donors, really bringing everybody together. And often I think it does really take a seasoned capital campaign consultant to really help ensure that everyone's rowing in the same direction. So that might be a person that you bring along for the ride. Second, I think we've talked about it this whole time, is flexibility, but I'll say it again because plans do change, costs rise, timelines shift, unexpected challenges, but also unexpected opportunities might present themselves. And so if you stay adaptable throughout the campaign, it's probably going to be more successful. And then maybe most importantly, just it's about people, right? It's not about dollars. I think that that's important advice. At the end of every day here at Kids Meals, we think about the preschoolers who are hungry, and that's why we're here. That's what we're doing. And so when you really keep that in mind, relationships drive everything. Relationships with the people that we're working with and the leadership of this campaign, the relationships with our donors, starting with people we know and building trust and really letting the relationships we have open doors to new ones, I think is what really makes a campaign successful.
Very, very well said. And first of all, congratulations on, on the new building and, everything that you all have going on with raising this and and putting on a successful capital campaign. Allie,
Thank you.
congratulations. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. This was a wonderful conversation. I learned quite a bit today.
It was so great to be here, Rob. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Allie. And for more information on Kids Meals and the Building Hope campaign, visit kidsmealsinc.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.